On March 4th, President Donald Trump delivered a 100-minute address to a joint session of Congress. He declared America is back, highlighting his administration's actions during the initial 6 weeks of his second term. Welcome back to Riks Europe, Roan Asselman, America columnist for Doorbraak.
Hi, Rebecca.
So first of all, how would you say Trump's speech from last night compares to his past addresses in terms of tone, policy focus, and rhetoric?
I thought it was perfectly fine. I think one of the things it shows is that Trump, unlike what some people like to say, is actually capable of learning. I think what his speech showed is that he has become a mature politician. Now, he might be very annoyed himself that people would call him a politician, but it is obviously what he has become over the last decade, because that's how long it's been. He listed a number of his accomplishments. Of course, Democrats or his opponents in general would say that those are not accomplishments. Those obviously those are the things that he did wrong. Plenty of focus, obviously, on what has happened with budget cuts, or some of them illegal, some of them done by Elon Musk and Doge, basically impounding funds that were allocated by Congress, not spending them as they should be spent, but also other aspects of arbitrary spending where Trump indeed said, look, we're going to peel those back, we're going to pull those back, and we're going to make the government a little bit more efficient and a little bit less costly for the American taxpayer, which is, of course, a big one for Republicans, but also just for independents who have this idea and who feel that government is bloated, but they can't really put their finger on what's wrong. And I think that's obviously what Trump and Musk have been doing over the past few months. Well, what am I saying? Months, weeks. That has been quite big. Focus on obviously the illegal immigration situation on the southern border, where indeed deportations have gone up, although not as much as he would like to, but more importantly, encounters at the border have been down dramatically since the Biden administration. And I do think that's a pretty big one, because you obviously want to work on the people who are in the country and who shouldn't be in the country, but you also definitely want to stop the flow at the border. So otherwise you kind of, you're kind of trying to dry up the place, but with the water still running. And of course, that's something you absolutely cannot do. And of course, Ukraine, but I'm sure we'll talk about Ukraine a bit more.
And given the strong partisan reactions to his speech, obviously from the Democrats, even Al Green, who was escorted out of the meeting, what does this tell us about the current state of American policies and Trump's influences in his second term?
Look, there is always a slight romanticization when it comes to years past, right? Like everything was always better just right before the exact moment in time right now. And I don't think that's not true. The polarization in the United States has been something that goes back well into the last century. These kind of antics also during presidential speeches are not exactly new. There was quite a famous one when Obama addressed Congress, and a Republican Congress man also, or woman, shouted, "You lie," and that was kind of looked down upon. And I guess that's maybe the difference here, where even among Republicans back then, that little piece of theatrics was generally condemned, not seen as very statesmanlike, whereas Democrats right now are uniform in their let's say very active and a little bit exaggerated maybe opposition to whatever Trump does. Politics in the United States has become even more oppositional, I think, meaning that whatever Trump does, even if it's wildly popular with the American population, I'll give you one example in a short while, but even if it's wildly popular with the American population, it will always be opposed by the Democratic Party. And the example I would like to give is Trump obviously also notoriously banned or tries to ban biological men participating in women's sports, right? And that is something that no Democrat is willing to vote in favor of. There was a vote in the Senate and all Democrats voted against, I think with the exception of John Fetterman, who is a bit of bit of a weirdo in the Democratic Party. But this is an 80-20 proposition. There's polling on this, and 80% of the American population supports the idea that men, and of course this is what I mean is trans women, men, biological men, should not participate in women's sports because it's not fair, and Americans generally are opposed to whatever is not fair. So that's an 80-20 proposition, but still 100% of Democrats in Congress at least vote against this. And this is what I mean by this insanely oppositional nature of American politics today.
And I wanted to ask for your take on the meeting between Zelensky and Trump that obviously has been very controversial. Some people take Trump's side, some people take Zelensky's side, but it's also sort of changed the debate a little bit. Could you tell us how significant was this and also his actions in this meeting?
I think there's so many different aspects when it comes to this meeting, but also to the broader Ukraine debate that has made it a bit of a mess to even talk about it, because you get placed in one of these camps like pro-Ukraine, anti-Ukraine, pro-Putin, anti-Putin. It doesn't really make any sense anymore. But to maybe touch upon a few of those. First of all, it's quite obvious who watched the entire press conference and who didn't. This is a very big division, first one. Because if you only look at the last 10 minutes, right, it basically looks like Trump, and especially J.D. Vance, the vice president, instigate this confrontation out of nowhere. This is not true. The first 40 minutes of the press conference, of the press moment, were perfectly amicable, were perfectly fine, nice. But what you could see throughout the press conference is that Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, kept pushing for something, namely hard security guarantees from the United States, for something that Trump obviously did not want to deliver, at least not on camera. And he does this a few times. And you could tell that Trump gets slightly more annoyed every single time, which you would expect because there's all these cameras and he has made it obvious that he's not going to discuss this. They were there for an economic mineral deal, which you could say was kind of an indirect guarantee because the Americans would now be invested in Ukraine for a long period of time. But, putting that aside, and that's kind of when things blow up. At one point, Zelensky basically brushes aside the idea of talking to Putin because Putin is a terrorist, a killer, is what he calls him, which is, as far as I'm concerned, all true. But that kind of also undermines the American initiative for a peace deal and the work that Trump and Vance are doing in this regard. So this is, I think, a major one, which is that this didn't come out of nowhere. I honestly don't think it was a trap laid by Trump and Vance. You saw this on social media a bit, where people were saying, well, this was all planned. I don't think so. I watched the entire conference. There's no indication for me that this is true. But if you zoom out a little bit when it comes to the Ukraine debate, I'm afraid that once again, a relatively minor incident, because I still call this a minor incident, this press conference, is used to make these wild claims about the course that European foreign policy towards Ukraine and towards Russia should be realigned, as if you could see this in some newspapers and some magazines, some commentators saying, well, America is the enemy now, right? We can never trust the White House again. Europe is on its own. To this I say, calm down. Let's let things play out. Just earlier today or yesterday, Trump again reiterated that he is in favor of NATO, that he has no plans on leaving NATO, and that he's generally still committed to the security of Eastern Europe. So let's all calm down a bit and let's not do anything drastic, because that press moment was not a big thing. What we are doing right now in Europe, our reaction to it actually might be. And that is what I am most concerned about. And maybe if I can still finish up maybe about the Ukraine thing, there's also obviously the meat of the matter, right? Which is, how is this war going to end? And this is where I am personally concerned, because you may not agree with Trump's plan. You may say, well, this mineral deal, that's not going anywhere. Trump is not really interested in Ukraine and its future, right? But you have to have some kind of alternative. And today in Europe, our plan seems to be no plan. Our plan seems to be, well, we're going to keep giving Ukraine a lot of money to defend itself, and then we'll see. That seems to be the plan. We'll hope for the best. Whereas Trump is saying, look, there's going to be some territory that's lost. You're never going to get that back. There will be some type of security guarantee, maybe mostly from the Europeans. Maybe America will join. But it's going to have to be a compromise. And Europeans are still saying there's going to be no compromise. All Ukraine's territory will be recovered. How? We'll see. And in the meantime, many, many more Ukrainian men will die, and many, many more Ukrainian families will be torn apart and displaced. And this is where I have a personal problem with this, because you may not agree with Trump, but you have to come up with something better.
You touched on it a little bit now, of course, but how do you think European leaders should approach these latest developments?
I think Europe is... it's tricky, because I think there's several types of leaders, and they all have a similar reaction, but for different reasons. I think there are actual people in Europe who are just using this dust-up in the White House as a way of getting what they already wanted before. This is just a prior for them, which is, we want to get rid of America, right? You can see this both on the extreme left and the extreme right, I think. People who just want to get rid of American influence in Europe and who are using this to get this done. And if it wasn't this particular thing that happened, it would have been a next one or a next one. I don't think this is smart, because we are not willing to actually bear the cost and the burden of our own security. We say we are, but we aren't. I'll give you one example. There was quite a famous poll on European funding for Ukraine. And people in several countries were polled on whether they think that Ukraine should get more or less funding, whether they get enough or they don't get enough in general, right? And majorities in Spain, in Italy, in Sweden, whatever, they said, no, Ukraine should get more funding. This is very important. And then the second question was, do you think that your country should give more funding? And all these countries, you may see where I'm going with this, all these countries, the people from those countries said, no, not from us. We're already doing enough. It has to come from other countries. But you see, if all countries are saying that, then no one is going to give any extra money. So this is just one example of how Europe is, we're really not ready to do what it takes. Even if we keep saying, press conferences that we are, America's contribution to the European defense industry is way too big and way too important, as far as I'm concerned, to just throw away because there's a president in the White House that we don't like, who does things a different way, but who, as far as we can tell right now, is doing only one thing, which is trying to make this war in Ukraine stop. And if that is a reason to blow up a transatlantic alliance, because right now we're the ones blowing it up, not him. If that's the reason, then, I think we may be on to use a term that the left likes to use, we may be on the wrong side of history on this one.
Thank you very much, Roan Asselman, America columnist for Doorbraak, for your insights.
Thank you, Rebecca.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.